Hey, Matt. Steve. He's using the wrong link. We're going to make him a panelist. He's being promoted right now. Okay. Go ahead and go ahead. Steve, are you there?
Yes, I think so.
Good.
I'm somewhere.
Steve, do you want to introduce the program and the panelists, and as we were discussing, do you want to do that?
Or
I can do that.
The panelists, and then I'll make some opening remarks.
Yeah.
Hey, John, why don't you go ahead and do what you had planned, and then Steve, you'll do your opening remarks, and I'll give some Zoom instructions after that. How's that sound?
Great. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Okay, welcome everyone. Good evening. This is the annual budget hearing and also includes proposed landfill and Berthoud, Estes Park, Red Feather Lakes, Wellington transfer fee, the proposed rate increases. So the purpose of this evening is to inform people about the proposed 2021 budget and also the proposed fee rate increases for the landfill as well as the various transfer stations. I'm Commissioner John Kafalis, District 1. I am joined by our chair, Commissioner Steve Johnson, District 2, and Tom Donnelly from District 3. Also, we have Lou Perez, our solid waste, interim solid waste director. And we have Josh Fudge, budget director, as well as Matthew Bahanin, our budget analyst, and I believe, of course, our esteemed county manager, Linda Hoffman. With that said, I'll turn it over to Commissioner Johnson in a moment. I just wanted to say, I know he's going to make some opening comments, but I appreciate the folks that are on. This is really, really important, even though it's not the most exciting thing. But if it's done right, a budget is meant to represent or reflect the priorities and the values of our community. And the more that people are involved in this budget process, the more reflective it is of what people think is important. So with that said, again, welcome everyone. Commissioner Johnson, you are on. Good, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner Kafalis, and I want to thank everyone who's joining us either live or watching this later as it's recorded. Normally we take our budget hearings on the road. We go up to Estes Park and then in a location in Fort Collins. We like to go out into the communities, but unfortunately this year we're unable to do that. So we're experimenting with something a little bit different in hopes that this will allow maybe some new and different people to participate in our hearing this year. And I think our budget staff are going to share with you a new strategy that they've developed that will give you the chance to actually make your suggested changes to the county budget, keeping in mind that you have to balance the county budget each year. A couple things I want to share with you. First, while we talk about the landfill rates, Larimer County is in the middle of opening a new landfill, as our existing landfill on South Taft Hill Road is facing closure in the next few years. We're opening a new landfill north of Wellington. Will be much different than the landfill we have now, and there are a number of strategies taking place in this operation to divert about 40% of the material out of the future landfills. Those new strategies cost money, and new landfills have different environmental standards than previous landfill had, but we are able to dispose of waste in a much more sustainable manner in Larimer County. As we discuss the budget, I think there's a couple of things that are important to remember. First off, we always like to remind folks that almost everything that we do inside of the municipalities, inside of the cities, as well as in the unincorporated areas. So this is an important issue for everyone in Larimer County. We budget very conservatively in Larimer County. Doing so has allowed us to respond to some of the most serious disasters in our county history with existing revenue. We've also been able to build a new Loveland office building, an alternative sentencing building, and now we're working on a jail improvement project using reserves that the county has established through this conservative budgeting approach. And we've done these things with no new taxes and no new debts. And I also want to credit our county employees As a part of our budgeting process, we measure outcomes to make sure we're getting the very best from every tax dollar in the services that we provide to our community. And our county employees and departments and fellow elected officials do something that's pretty unheard of in government. At the end of the year, they don't spend all of their budgets typically, and they return that money to the county. That has allowed us to build up a lot of reserves in Larimer County that has put us in an excellent financial position. As a matter of fact, we have one of the highest bond ratings possible for a local government, something only a couple percentage of the counties in the United States have achieved. And it's through the hard work of our budget staff, our county employees, our fellow elected officials, and a very conservative fiscal budgeting approach that has allowed us to do that. We welcome your input to the budget process. We'll be adopting this late in December of this year. And our folks will share with you several ways that you can share your feedback because we do all of these things for you, the folks that live in our community. Thank you for letting me visit with you this evening.
Thank you, commissioners. I'm going to give just a few Zoom instructions to folks here on how they can participate before we turn it over. For those of you who are joining us for the first time in a public setting, first of all, thank you for being here tonight. You'll notice this is not like a typical Zoom meeting you have at work. We're actually using a platform called Zoom Webinar. We use it for a couple different reasons. They're both based around safety. First is that you'll notice there isn't a chat box like typical. There's something called a Q&A box. It works just like the chat box would work in a normal meeting. If you have questions that come up during presentations tonight, feel free to put your questions in that Q&A box, and we will go ahead and answer those when we get to that portion of the evening. The reason we use a Q&A box is because we worry about folks coming in. We do open this up to the public. Anyone can join us. We worry about folks coming in and sending out links that may put bugs on your computer or send you to a website you don't want to go to. So that helps kind of protect us from that. The second thing is you'll notice that you only have video of the panelists that are here tonight. Same reason, kind of same for safety, is we do invite our public to be here tonight, but we really don't have control over their video and we want to make sure everybody stays safe. As I mentioned, the Q&A box is available for you guys to ask questions. If you're joining us on YouTube, we do have the chat box there as well. You can put your questions in on YouTube and I'm monitoring that as we go tonight. Or you can raise your hand if you want to speak. So you'll notice that there's a little raise your hand feature at the bottom of your screen. You've joined us on Zoom. Of course, that's not available on YouTube. Raise your hand and I'll go ahead and walk you through the steps of unmuting yourself if you'd like to speak publicly tonight in this meeting. Otherwise, I don't think we have anyone who is called in tonight, but in case I've missed you, what you need to do is let me know you want to speak by pressing *9. Now, I don't mean you're using your cell phone and the app on the Zoom app on your phone. If you actually called in dialing the numbers, that's what I mean. You want to hit *9. If you're using the Zoom app on your phone, you should see the raise your hand feature or the Q&A feature as well. As I said, yeah, we're streaming live on the website and on YouTube and on FCTV, and folks that are watching, they're welcome to join us on the Zoom link to ask questions or on YouTube and ask questions there as well. And thank you for participating tonight. Commissioner Kafalis, back to you, I think.
Thank you, Michelle. County Manager Hoffman, would you like to make a couple of comments and then see if I think we're going to start. I'm not sure if we're going to start with the budget director or with the interim solid waste director. It's in your hands, Linda.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thanks to those of you who are listening. There have been plenty of introductions, so I won't say much at this juncture. I'll just say thank you to Michelle for being such a capable hostess for us. We appreciate your knowledge of this tool and the ability to use it tonight. So I think we are going to start on the solid waste side. So shall we just turn the mic over to Lou Perez, our interim director, and he'll give us about a 10-minute overview of what is proposed for fees beginning in 21 in the solid waste department.
Thank you very much, Linda. Let me put in my share screen here so I could get this presentation up and going. Can everyone see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Cool, thank you. Let me go into a little slideshow here. Well, thank you everyone for allowing us the opportunity, and thank you commissioners for allowing the Solid Waste Department the opportunity to present our 2021 proposed rate fees and what we are looking at for the upcoming year. Tonight's agenda is a real simple one. First, we're going to go over our goals. These are the initiatives of what is driving the rate and the fee structure. And we'll actually look at the fee structure itself. I just want to start off the presentation by just giving you the changes that we're adapting, and then the financial objectives, what are we looking to do with our financials and the fund balance. And then we'll take a quick look at the market comparison. Where does Larimer County stand in comparison to the other landfills, and are we offering the best rates to our customers? So in looking at our goals, as an enterprise fund, we must attain enough revenue to support the operations and invest in the future waste shed projects. As Commissioner Kafalis has said earlier, the driving factor to the Solid Waste Department is the operations as well as the future in what we are doing. And the adapted waste shed projects are something that is in the prime focus of our revenue source. So the proceeds that come from the landfill operation go into a fund, and then this fund is what's used in conjunction to fuel our waste shed projects. As we look at our waste shed projects, we're looking at a new modern landfill that is meeting all state and federal regulatory compliance, a new transfer station, which we will be breaking ground on January of 21, a compost operation that will include yard waste and food waste capability expansion, as well as construction and demolition. The other goal that we're looking at is the landfill tipping fees across the United States and Colorado continue to go up. And there is a reason before this. The state of Colorado has actually put in incentives for waste diversion by putting in fees associated with landfill disposal. And these fees are actually used for diversion projects. And part of our objective is to look at the comparables of the market for the Front Range and what would be the best resources for our materials, and as also what would be the best resources for the fees of where we are taking our revenues from. With the lower tipping fee, is difficult for us to do landfill diversion. So if you have lower tipping fee and landfill diversion, those are competing agendas. And that is part of the reason why landfill rates seem to be going up, and there are more fee structures associated with them. The other thing that we look at in our goal is we have made some changes in a few of our programs. We're looking at a few minimums, a 2 cubic yard minimum for some of our waste. We also have some incentives in there to promote more green waste recycling. That's yard waste, trees, limbs, and things of that nature. And the other goal in 2020, we have noticed that we've had a very unusual year. We've had a lot of we've had a lot of record-breaking traffic in our facility. We've had a tremendous amount of residential cars that have come to our operation. And one of our goals is to reduce this traffic. It is difficult because of the nature of the way the landfill is structured to attain long lines of traffic, and because it stems out all the way into Taft Hill Road. And we do our best to keep the traffic inside, but with the increase in residential traffic, it creates a danger and a safety concern. It's also difficult for our gatehouse attendants. So one of our goals with our pricing structure is to try to reduce some of the individual traffic, what we call the low volume traffic, where people bring in just 1 or 2 bags of trash. And we're trying to consolidate that to make a better feasibility for the safety of the operation, as well as our staff and our customers. So I'm going to jump right into the fee structure. And I think you could see this, okay, I've highlighted, this is the 2020 fee structure where we are on today, and these are the various categories. I won't go through them, but these are the same categories that we have had for the last couple of years. This is the new fee structure. And as you could see, we've increased our fee anywhere from 50 cents to as high as $2.35. And you may ask, well, why do we have a disparity in our fee structure? Well, that's because we are targeting most of the materials that will be hitting our transfer station. Because our transfer station will be taking the municipal solid waste, putting it in trucks, and then transferring it to the new landfill, there's a higher cost of operation associated with that. So we proportionalize the fee structure to those materials that will be hitting the transfer station more consistently. And we're trying to incentivize those materials that, for example, green waste or other materials that are associated with any type of diversion program. We're trying to incentivize that as well. So we've uniquely looked at our fee structure from that perspective, rather than just taking across the board percentage on every single category. So what you're seeing here is a fee structure associated with our tipping fee directly for the landfill. And in addition to that, we are looking at tires. Here's our fee structure associated with tires. This is the current 2020 price. This is the 2021 price. We've had a difficult year just in the last year that I've been here, just recycling tires. Contractors don't seem to want to take it nowadays. And the Larimer County landfill is one of only two landfills. Denver Arapahoe landfill is the other one that takes tires. So there's only two landfills here in the state that actually take tires and have a recycling program associated with it. Our costs have gone up significantly for this program, and therefore the increase reflects the operational cost to keep this program alive and well. The other fee structure that I want to mention is for our convenience centers for Wellington and Red Feather. Again, we are looking at a fee structure anywhere from $1 to $1.50, and these are proportionally associated with the percentage of the same fee structure that we've had for the transfer station. So if loose waste goes up by 10%, we proportionalize that 10% increase to reflect in our transfer stations and our convenience centers. So that's pretty much how we did that. The last one here is the Estes Park. You could see the 2020, the current, and the increased fee structure associated with that. Again, this is a proportional rate based on the increases that we're looking at for the landfill and the opening of the new transfer station. Before I go into any other slides, I just wanted to take a pause here if anyone has any particular questions on the actual fees and the fee structure. No questions? Okay. I also want to mention to the right, as you've seen before with this type of chart, there is a fee associated with the state of Colorado. And a lot of these fees are associated with land diversion, landfill diversion. You have the front range waste diversion fee, which is a new fee that came into last year. I just want to say that because of this fee, I sit on this board and we just gave out $2 million in waste diversion goals for programs associated with landfill diversion. So the money that you see here with these fees to the right does go into a fund that is issued by the state of Colorado to programs for landfill diversion. But the new fees that I show here don't include this surcharge that is added on to these particular fees. So I just want to point that out. Now we're going to get into our revenue and we're going to look at our future needs. This chart represents from 2009 to 2020 where we have been as far as our revenue. What is interesting about this chart is you'll see in 2021, we're going to have a need for more revenue because of the association of the programs. based on 23 and 24, we're looking at nearly a revenue need of almost close to $20 million. And why is that? And that's mostly attributed to the projects. We have quite a number of large projects that are coming in, the wayshed projects, based on the projects as far as the costs associated with the projects and the costs associated with operating these projects. We could be in a position in 2023 where we're actually closing a landfill and opening up a new one. So we will have two landfills going on at the same time. Not only is it a high capital cost, but it's also a higher operational cost in conjunction with that. Where there's need for revenue, there's an expense. This slide shows you the balance sheet as far as what are the driving factors associated with the revenue need. And the big one here is the construction of the transfer station, in addition to the beginning the structure of the cost structure with the new landfill. That will take place in 21, and the majority of the landfill construction will begin in 22 going into 23. As we look at 24 and 25, we'll start to look at the potential of the expansion of the compost operation and construction and demolition. Thanks to Josh and his team, we've been able to put together a look at the fund balance. So this slide shows you, the graph shows you the illustration of the fund balance. For years, the solid waste department has had a very healthy fund balance. And unfortunately, I am the bearer of bad news that has to spend this money, fortunately, but it is for a good reason. Because of that, you could see the draw of the money associated with the capital projects as it spans from 2020 into 22. And then as we start to ramp up operations with the transfer station, hopefully we will generate a little bit more revenue to be able to add that back into the fund. This is important because we need the fees associated with the transfer station as well as the landfill to build back the reserve and also fund the rest of the projects. You will see here in 2020, the beginning fund balance. The yellow here represents some updated numbers that I placed in based on current numbers and figures that we have projected. So we're looking at a revenue in 2020 of about 11.3 million, and our budget was about 9.6. In 2021, with the proposed fee structure that I've mentioned in the previous slide, we could be looking at a revenue of about $14 million. This will be a significant jump, and will help us to recoup the fund balance. That's why the fee structure that was proposed earlier is important, because it will help us to get the fund balance back on a positive note. This fee, as well as the additional aspect of the operations expanding and the fees associated with that, we believe will help us in the future to recoup the fund balance and keep these capital projects going and expanding. The last segment is a comparison. So someone may ask, okay, Lou, you are raising fees. Where do you stand in comparison to other landfills? Well, I could tell you that I've been in this business a long time, and it's well known that the Larimer County landfill is one of the lowest cost operating landfills in all of the Front Range. If we look at where Larimer is, what I did is I took a snapshot of some of the comparables of a cubic yard. If we look at just at loose trash, and since we charge on a cubic yard basis and we compare that fee on a cubic yard basis to other landfills and look at those equivalents, you can see that Larimer County over the years has provided a very low cost operation to the public. And it's doing a good job serving as a low cost alternative for disposal to the Larimer County community. So even at the 2020, with the fee structure that we have, if we project out 2021, we are still considerably lower as far as our rate in comparison to other landfills for loose waste. I also want to show you a couple of other ones. This is a look at comparing if we had a load of a pickup truck. So the general public that comes in, most of them bring solid waste in pickup trucks. And I wanted to look at that comparable and compare that rate to the other landfills, the same group of landfills in the Front Range. And you could see that the Larimer County landfill is still very reasonable in comparison to the other landfills in the Front Range. If we look at our construction and demolition, what we call C&D, in the industry, it's known as rubble here in our pricing. You could see that the construction and demolition, or the C&D, is also another category where Larimer County comes in favorable in comparison to other landfills across the Front Range. So with that, that concludes my presentation. I just wanted to recap and bring to perspective the need for the fees in association to support our programs. The rate structure was looked at very methodically in association to our capital needs, our operational needs, and we tried to proportionalize that in a relative contents to be fair with all the associations of our categories. And lastly, we also looked at the comparison of where we are today in comparison to the other landfills. And with that, that concludes my presentation. I will leave this open to questions, please. Oh, let me get out of this. I got to stop sharing my screen.
Lou, thank you for your presentation. Michelle, has anyone posted any questions in various ways that they're able to?
Not yet, Commissioner. Thank you for asking. We don't have any questions in the Q&A section of the Zoom meeting. So again, for those that are joining us on Zoom, feel free to put some questions in if you have any. I'm in that Q&A box. I'm also looking on YouTube, and there is a slight delay on YouTube, of course, as you would imagine. But it doesn't look like we do have folks watching on YouTube. It doesn't look like we have any questions there yet either.
I wonder, Commissioners Johnson or Donnelly, do you folks have any questions? Well, Michelle, then I would suggest we move on to the next chapter of this presentation, and I believe that's our budget. Thank you, Lou. Josh Fudge, our Larimer County Budget Director, who is assisted ably by our budget analyst Matthew Behonen.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
A question, Lou. When will the board consider and adopt this new fee schedule? Just to the public, if someone thinks about something they want to ask or wants to interact with us at some time before adoption, when is that going to occur? You might let people know that.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. That's an excellent question. So we, right after this meeting, one of the first things that we're planning to do is to send a letter out to all the hauling community and let them know of this fee structure. We didn't want to do that until we had an opportunity to present this information to the county commissioners. Once we've gotten feedback from the hauling community, as well as feedback from the general public, we will represent this information to the commissioners. I would have to lean on Lori Cadrich on when that will take place, because I'm not familiar with the schedule. Pardon my ignorance on that one, sir. But our goal is to provide any general feedback back to the commissioners so they could see what the community is asking or comments that they might have, and then we present this information for their approval. But I'm sorry, I don't have the timelines on that. I don't know, Linda, maybe you could help me with that one.
I would think that you would need 2 or 3 weeks to do that, Lou. So that would maybe take us to, say, the end of November. So typically the commissioners adopt the new rate structure at the landfill just at administrative matters on a Tuesday morning. So perhaps we could do that right after Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
I would suggest, Lou, when you have more details of the timeline, if you could post that in the appropriate place on the solid waste website, and maybe Michelle, if you could put that link up for folks to know. Thank you. Josh, you're on, sir.
right. Thank you, Commissioner, and good evening, everyone. I'm going to share my screen as well. And while I do that, I think, Linda, if you want to make any introductory comments, you can take it away.
Thank you, Josh. I know that most people don't really think that budgeting is nearly as exciting as Josh, Matt, and I do, but it really is the way that the county uses tax revenue and other sources of funding to serve the community. And as Commissioner Johnson pointed out, many of our services, in fact, almost all of our services, are delivered across Larimer County to both incorporated and unincorporated residents. In addition, many of the services that we provide are statutorily required. So we have some very tightly constrained, dedicated sources of funding that must be used for those purposes. And so you'll see that as Josh presents the budget. I would be remiss if I didn't thank all of our elected officials and our department heads for the very responsible management that they provide for public revenues. The commissioners set direction and set the budget, but then it's really up to those department heads and elected officials for the day-to-day management, and they perform that work very expertly and with, I think they're just plain chintzy, you know, they do not spend money if there's another way of getting things done, and we appreciate that. So this is a little bit different of a budget year, as you'll hear. And so Josh has his screen up, so I'll hush and let him get started. Well, I guess we're going to start with the things I usually talk about. So you'll see on the screen some of the big initiatives that we have going on. You've heard about the solid waste facilities. I think most people in the community are familiar with behavioral health. And we're also implementing phase 2 at the ranch, building out the next phase of our master plan there. And you'll see on the left side of the screen what we're doing in terms of strategic plan initiatives that were funded in 2020. What the county typically does is we really tighten our belts on standard operational things so that we can put money toward these larger investments for the future and these major initiatives. And that's why you see such a long list of things. I think they continue on to the next page. We have had some added challenge this year of responding to COVID-19. We are blessed to receive quite a bit of funding through various sources, the most flexible of which is the Coronavirus Relief Fund funding. We received $15.5 million and have been fortunate to draw that money down from the state, and we're requesting an additional $4 million from the reserve fund. That money is being pushed out into the community in various kinds of supportive ways, and those checks are already being written, and we're beginning to see the results. We were surprised by the Cameron Peak fire. This budget by statute had to have been published by October the 15th. And it just so happened that that was right in the same time frame that the commissioners set aside some reserves money to address Cameron Peak fire recovery. So at the end of our slide deck tonight, you'll see how Josh has adjusted our projection of reserves availability in order to account for that $9.2 million. So the county is involved in large initiatives as well as day-to-day operations. And Josh, I hope you'll clue us in on how we're dividing the money in 2021.
Sure, thank you. So I will walk through a somewhat high-level overview of the county's budget, highlighting some of the main initiatives and the main changes, if you will. We're trying to make this tell a story more than showing boring tables filled with numbers and things like that. So the budget is really broken out into 3 or 4 main categories. The top slice of the donut you see there, the yellowish slice, about $287 million. That is the county's annual ongoing operating budget to provide all of the services that we provide, whether it's natural resources, rangers, or operating the jail, or managing human services on behalf of the state, and all those types of things. So the total budget is about $586 million altogether. And so just about half of that is actually what's spent to provide services. The next largest slice of that donut is $193 million on the lower left, and that's for our capital budget. As Linda mentioned in the beginning, we have a lot of capital projects going on. These are results of several master plans, whether it's facilities that solid waste that Lou just described, or facilities, or the ranch. Those plans are starting to kick into gear and have been for a couple of years now. And so $193 million is budgeted in 2021 for capital projects. Excuse me. And then two very tiny slices, there's a third one. $82 million is non-operational, and those are expenses that the county has in our budget, but aren't really related to providing services or capital. Those are things like submitting the municipality share of our open space sales tax to them, and some fringe benefits and internal service charges, things that are double counted in that gross budget. And then finally, those two tiny slices are disaster costs, and up to October 15th, that included the last two projects we had recovering from the 2013 floods. This amount will almost certainly change as we continue to see how COVID impacts the county, and also any recovery from the Cameron Peak and the East Troublesome Fire, should those be necessary. So we also break our budget out into what we call service categories, which are groups of services that are very similar in nature. And so this is a chart that shows how that $286 million, our net operating budget, is allocated. The largest single slice of this donut is public safety, which is one of the very core services that counties were invented to provide. That includes things like operating the jail and the operations of the Office of the Sheriff, the Office of the District Attorney, so prosecution of criminal offenses, our Criminal Justice Services Division, which provides largely alternatives to alternatives to incarceration. The next largest slice, the orangish one, the blue one, is community planning, infrastructure, and resources, just under $72 million. Those are things like the ranch, natural resources, road and bridge, community development and planning, and things of that nature. That's about $72 million. And then just slightly smaller than that is human and economic health. Those are things like our Human Services Department, which provides human services programs on behalf of the state, things like child support, child abuse prevention and investigations, elder abuse things, and things of that nature. And then support services are those overhead type of things that we provide to help the county function, things like IT, human resources, finance, the budget office, and things like that. And finally, the smallest slice is public records and information, and that includes things like the clerk and recorder, where you would go for motor vehicle registration, elections, documents related to real estate, also our Office of the Assessor and the Office of the Treasurer. And so this shows how that general or net operating budget is broken out, with public safety being the largest slice. So we tried to come up with a key storyline or theme of the 2021 budget. And it really is continuing to invest in the future while maintaining service levels and preparing for an uncertain fiscal future. And what that means is the 2021 budget really kind of continues our service levels as is, without any significant changes, and while pruning back some things in preparation for that uncertain fiscal future, which is largely related to the economy as it's impacted by COVID, and the Gallagher Amendment, which has a very significant impact on our county property tax revenue, which I will show a slide related to that in a moment. So a summary or highlights of the county's expenditure budget. That net operating budget that I described before actually declines by about $2.8 million, or just about 1% from the 2020 revised budget. The decrease is largely due to some good news that the county has received this year and going into next year, which is that our health insurance costs that the county has to pay has actually stagnated quite a bit. And so we've built up some reserves that we can use to pay for those health insurance costs. And we're able to decrease the amount that we have to put into departmental budgets to pay for health insurance for employees. We're also preparing for that Gallagher Amendment, as I mentioned a little bit, by slightly increasing some vacancy savings. Our departments routinely have vacancy and turnover. And so we did look into those budgets and operations a little bit, and we started to plan to save some of that based on the uncertain future. And we've also made slight reductions to operating budgets. That's generally discretionary things like special projects, travel and training, sort of the low-hanging fruit of any budget that can be pulled back when we have these uncertain times. And one other thing that we are fortunate to have for 2021 is that the 2020 budget has the cost for operating the presidential election. And needless to say, the cost for next year's election cycle will be much lower. Personnel costs make up probably the majority, a great majority of the net operating budget. And so those decline from 2020 by about $5.5 million. And again, that's largely due to that reduction in health insurance costs for county employees, which will be about $8 million. Salary and wage costs do increase slightly. There was about a 1.5% increase in wages for employees and step increases in the office of the sheriff. But we did, or in this budget, there's minimal new positions due to those future concerns. Capital outlay, again, this is a expenditure type. This is a little bit different than the slice of the pie we showed earlier that had 193 million. This obviously is a huge amount of about 151 million, which includes these large capital projects that we've described. The jail improvement project, expanding our criminal justice services facility. Right now there's a wait for folks who are eligible for these programs who have to sit in the jail for as many as 40 days before they can get into these programs. Beginning construction of our new fleet services campus, construction of the behavioral health facility, implementation of the ranch master plan, and as Lou described, implementation of the solid waste master plan. Expenditures for COVID-19 and the Cameron Peak fire. When this budget was put together, there were ideas of what it may cost, somewhere between $4 and $15 million. Those costs are not included in either the 2020 revised budget that you have before you or next year's proposed budget. As that information becomes more solid, we can make changes to this year's budget and next year's budget, including that $9.2 million that was set aside from general fund balance for the Cameron Peak fire. There's approximately $2 million of funding from the Coronavirus Relief Fund, money that the county has already been reimbursed from the state that was set aside for possible needs in 2021, especially related to testing and a shortfall in that's estimated in the health department. They received funding from the CDC to provide their suppression plan, and they are estimating that they may not have received enough, and so we've set aside some funding for that. And as Linda mentioned, we're always seeking additional and expanded funding resources for that. On the revenue side, how to pay for all those expenditures. When we put the proposed budget together, we had assumed about a 1.5% increase in assessed values for 2021. Unfortunately, the assessor's initial certification, which was provided to the county on, I think, October 12th or 13th. So needless to say, we didn't have time to react to it for this proposed budget. actually came in with a decline of almost 1%. And so that has an impact in general fund property tax revenue from what's in the proposed budget of about $3.4 million. And so that will have to be rectified when the budget is adopted. The changes from the valuation for 2020, the most significant is oil and gas dropping by about 2/3. And that has an impact on property tax revenues of $2.7 million. So the vast majority of the reduction is due to oil and gas. The rest of the classifications of value sort of changed up and down in a lot of cases. You can see that a commercial actually increased by 1%, which was a bit of a surprise, and residential property increased by 2% as well. One other thing that the county has to deal with is tax increment financing. We have the highest percentage of our taxable value that is in tax increment financing districts in the state. The value in those districts actually increased by 3%. So it was a bit of a double whammy as far as 2021 is concerned. The percentage of value that's in TIF districts rose from 5.2 to 5.4%. And that would result in $7.9 million being diverted to tax increment financing districts next year. In general, most other revenues, sales and use tax and special ownership taxes, we assume to be flat going into next year. Sales and use tax, especially sales tax, has actually increased a little bit over 2019 here in 2020. Part of that was due to a very rapid increase early in the year before COVID hit. And then of course, once COVID hit back in the spring, it declined pretty precipitously, but has actually bounced back a little bit. And so because of our conservative revenue budgeting, we may see some good news, not only this year, but next year from those revenues as well. Intergovernmental revenue is down $25.4 million. That's largely because we have a lot of COVID related revenues from the state and federal government now in our 2020 budget, especially that coronavirus relief fund. We make no assumption for any additional federal or state funding next year. Whether Congress and or the state provides more is totally up in the air. Licenses and permits countywide are up about 10%. That's largely due to activity at the landfill. External service charges are up only about 1%, again, being pretty conservative as far as what those charges are. Those are things that when folks pay for services from the county, especially vehicle license registrations and things like that. Internal service charges, that's the county charging itself. Not very exciting. That's down almost $10 million. That's largely because of that health insurance. And of course, interest earnings are down 35% with lower interest rates and the planned spending of our fund balance on capital projects. There will be quite a bit less interest revenue next year. So when it comes to the general fund, this is the fund where most of the property tax goes. It provides a lot of those core mandated services, things like public safety, especially. 80% of the general fund budget is made up of property tax. The remaining 20% you can see is split among 4 categories, external charges being the largest of those. That is largely motor vehicle and the office of the clerk and recorder. There's a little bit of intergovernmental revenue. That's largely the sheriff's revenues from providing contracted services to municipalities. So the general fund is really very reliant on property tax revenue. And so I mentioned earlier the uncertain future caused especially by the economy and the Gallagher Amendment. This is a chart that our commissioners have seen several times and is a projection of what could happen to general fund property tax revenue should the Gallagher Amendment kick in and require the residential assessment rate, the rate at which the value of residential property can be taxed, could drop by about 11.5 or result in about an 11.5% decrease. The Gallagher Amendment is in the state constitution. It requires that no more than 45% of all property taxes collected in the state be collected on residential property. The remaining 55% has to come from everything else. Because of COVID and its impact on the economy, it was estimated that the value of commercial especially, but really all non-residential property would drop. The Gallagher Amendment would then require that the taxable value of residential property also drop to maintain that 45-55 split. You saw a little bit of that in one of the previous slides showing the drastic decrease in oil and gas. That is one of those non-residential values that goes into the 55%. This estimate was put together back in, I think, April or May, when the impact of the economy on COVID was looking to be very dire. So this is hopefully a worst case scenario, but it could be anywhere from this or worse, or hopefully maybe a little bit better, depending also on the outcome of Amendment B next Tuesday or this coming Tuesday. Quickly, this slide just shows the impact of tax increment financing on the county's values. You can see those bars represent the assessed value that's in TIF districts. It rose quite substantially in the early 2000s and continued to rise again here in the late or 2020. It did dip a little bit last year, but has increased again going into next year. And again, that's almost $8 million of county property tax levy that will go to these districts. So one change from the presentation that we provided at a work session just over a week ago is running some scenarios of what the general fund balance could look like. Again, there's a lot of uncertainty as to what is going to happen with the economy, with state and federal revenues related to COVID, and of course the Gallagher Amendment. So all of the scenarios in the slide or the projection that you're about to see do assume that there is a mild recession that impacts jail sales and use taxes and charges for services, but then ticks back up in the out years. It does have built in, as Linda mentioned, that $9.2 million transfer to the disaster fund from the general fund, and it does not have any assumption of additional disaster or capital project funding overruns built in. Scenario one is that baseline scenario. It is the one that was provided back on October 21st. Generally, Amendment B fails, property tax value drops about 11.5%. We have a very minimal assumption of our annual surpluses, and we hold off on doing a lot of things such as staffing the jail improvement project or adding positions and anything else until revenues pick back up in 2024. Scenario two is looking at our turnback, which is another word for the surplus that the general fund has that we put into our general fund reserve and can use for things like capital projects and things like that. This does assume that Amendment B fails, but that we generate about $5 million of surpluses annually. In general, the last 4 or 5 years, our general fund surpluses have been between $8 and $10 million. However, we've generally allowed departments to spend anywhere from $3 to $4 million of that. So $5 million is probably reasonable. It may be a little harder in an economic downturn, especially when you look at interest revenue. Those were routinely way above budget. Those are going to go down. But in general, this is an amount that we've been able to achieve in these past few years. And again, it basically says we're going to hold off on doing anything else until revenues recover. And then scenario three is, should Amendment B pass, we look at a property tax value increase of probably about 2% in 2022. Would be a reassessment, or the budget after a reassessment year, I should say. Then the county does go ahead and start to provide higher personnel cost increases, and that jail improvement staffing, about $3 million, gets added back, and that service proposals and their strategic plan kick in much earlier and are each about $1.5 million. So this chart shows what general fund balance would look like. And I apologize, I should have probably changed the y-axis, but The sort of brownish gray on the bottom is that baseline scenario. And you can see, should that come to pass, our general fund reserves out in 27 to 28 would fall below the 10%, excuse me, the 10% minimum that we would recommend holding for things like disasters and things like that. The gold layer is scenario 2. So because it's higher, if you follow the top of the gold layer, that's what it would look like. And we would still face challenges out in 27 and 28. However, continuing to generate those surpluses over the next few years would maintain a pretty healthy fund balance. And then scenario 3, should Amendment B pass and the county kind of continues to respond to growing service needs and things like that, the fund balance does still drop due to declining revenues and things like that, but does stay relatively healthy. This is sort of the budget manager's way of saying things are very uncertain in the future. A lot is riding on what happens on Tuesday. A lot is riding if the result on Tuesday goes one way, then a lot rests on what happens with the residential assessment rate and property values and the economy and things of that nature. So quite honestly, out in the future, you know, and really that bottom layer is without real significant corrective action in the budget. It would maintain service levels and staffing levels to a large degree. And that's why you would see that fund balance drop. There are always things the county could do to keep fund balance at a healthy or desirable level. Any questions on that? All right. The capital budget, I'll walk through really briefly because we've seen the largest projects in this. We have a 5-year capital improvement plan. We do 5 categories of projects. The first is renewal. That's really a priority. That is maintaining and replacing those critical pieces of infrastructure that the county has, as opposed to letting things live way past their useful life and then costing even more to replace out in the future. The county does make it a priority to invest in those things and maintain them. You can see for 2021, that's about 14% of the budget. And that amount is generally fairly stable. The percentage certainly changes based on the next category, which is expansion. And that is really building new buildings, adding on to buildings that enhance their capabilities in significant ways. And you can see that in 2021, that's a very substantial percentage of the projects. And that's because of those things like the master plans at the ranch and solid waste, the jail expansion, and also the expansion of criminal justice services. Disaster projects, very small, those final 2 projects, 44H and County Road 47. Perhaps 2021 will be the final year that this is budgeted, and that's just under $9 million. And then land and real asset acquisition is generally a very small amount, and this is usually in natural resources, a budget they set aside to make any land purchases or easements for trails and things of that nature. Right now, in the proposed capital improvement plan, there's just over $533 million of expenses over this 5-year period from 21 to 24. Just some highlights, and you've seen these before. These large projects really are the bulk of the capital projects budget and almost the entire county budget as a whole. Very significant investments. And like I think one of the commissioners said, the ability to make these investments largely with our existing resources, almost or entirely with our existing resources, is a pretty great thing to be able to say. And so those projects will be ramping up in 2021, and a lot of them will continue on over the next 5 years. So finally, the service proposals. These are requests from departments and elected offices for additional funding beyond the target or the baseline amount that the commissioners provided. These are generally for new or enhanced things like that. I'm proud and happy to say and very thankful that our elected offices and departments were cognizant of our impending fiscal reality and uncertainty. The requests were very minimal and limited to that which really was necessary. In the past, we've received 50 to 70 requests for additional funding. I think this year it was 10 or maybe even under 10. And you can see that in one category, capacity expansion actually is a reduction in general fund support. Strategic plan goals was 150,000 and service expansion is 139,000. It's also important to point out that capacity expansion in general has been our priority. It's responding to increased need or demand as our population has grown or economic changes and things like that. Next is our strategic plan. And then third is those things that are service expansions, which are really adding on to what we already do. So this is the complete list of items. You can see that 4 of them were actually able to be absorbed within existing resources. One is replacement of an app for our assessor. One was adding on pretrial services staff in criminal justice services. Due to COVID, their workload has really changed. And so they needed these positions. Excuse me. Natural resources, they are making a change to one of their programs. They're going from a forestry program that costs about $140,000 that they felt they no longer needed to provide down to a noxious weed program in that part of the county that is not in the weed district. And so that's actually a reduction. And then you can see the sheriff will basically maintain general fund support for their fire attack module. They had relied on grants and things like that. So for 2021, that's able to be absorbed. For strategic plan engineering, the Box Elder Dam flood warning system will be about $150,000. That will have some ongoing costs for maintenance and monitoring and things like that. There's an IT project at the ranch that will be able to be absorbed. And for service expansion, there's one position being transferred from Human Services, which was largely paid for by state revenues, over to Human Resources, which is funded out of the general fund. And then in Public Affairs, a community perception survey and making that an annual instead of biannual project is $18,000. So very minimal. And again, I want to thank everyone for their understanding of our fiscal reality. And with that, I will turn it over to Matt, and he will walk through the project that I think Commissioner Kafalis mentioned, which is Balancing Act, or maybe it's Commissioner Johnson, sorry. It's the ability for citizens to go online and look at the county's budget and really give your feedback into where you think those scarce tax dollars and county resources, your priorities for the programs that should be funded. So Matt, I will thankfully stop talking and let you take it away.
Thanks, Josh. So I'm going to put a link to the Balancing Act tool into the chat. If you're watching on YouTube or something, you can go to larimer.org/budget/build-your-own-budget. It's BYOB. So this is an opportunity for you to go in and see the estimated revenues and planned expenses by service, by department, and you can go in and adjust up or down the budgeted amounts for each service area. What you do is you just click on the little plus and minus buttons for each department, and you can also click on the info button next to each department to go to the website or see a video or learn more about that specific revenue. Another thing that's very helpful is there's a little comment button where you can go in, and if you have a specific comment about a specific revenue or a specific program that you've interacted with or you're interested in, you can go and you put in your comments, and that'll come to us, and those are shared with the commissioners as input and feedback into the budget process. So what you see here on the presentation is just the results of the submissions that we've had so far on the proposed budget, and you can see they're from a variety of places in the county, mostly Fort Collins, which is reflective of the population, but looks like almost every town and city is represented. Maybe someone from Berthoud could could go in there and tell us what they think. But maybe next slide, Josh. So the average change in revenues, this is what was the 42 submissions. Charges for services, nobody adjusted, but that would include landfill fees, which were discussed earlier, passport fees, recording fees, things like that. Federal, state, and local government revenue, this would be payments in lieu of taxes from the National Forest Service, lottery revenues to use on natural resources, and intergovernmental revenues that we have for intergovernmental agreements like contracts with this for the school resource officers or the towns that Sheriff's Office provides patrol services for. Licenses and permits, that'd be like concealed carry permits, marriage licenses, planning licenses, planning permits, property taxes. So miscellaneous would be like interest and donations, not too big of a revenue source. Property taxes, sales tax, pretty self-explanatory. Anything that's bought in Larimer County, sales tax, property in Larimer County goes to that property tax, and then vehicle registrations as well. Nobody increased these revenues when they submitted, or at least on average, which is not surprising. But interesting to see the breakdown on where you want to fund your services. Then the average change in expenses, this is by department again. A lot of these departments that were increased look to be on top of people's minds. Behavioral health services, this is what was voted on, I guess 2 years ago now. I won't go through each one, but emergency management, obviously with the fires and COVID, a priority for people right now. Department of Health and Environment and Veteran Services, all up big. And folks decided to lower the assessor's office, the ranch, and the sheriff's office, most of all, both jail and law enforcement, which are big expenses. So again, if you have trouble with the tool or you just want to submit a comment via email, you can always email Josh Fudge, jfudge@larimer.org, or myself, mbhunnen@larimer.org. Call us, attend one of our virtual citizen meetings. Let us know what you think. A lot of times, maybe your question or your comment might not deal with the budget itself, but we work with every department in the county and we can point you in the right place. If it's an advisory board or a department head or an elected official that's over that program, we're happy to help pass all that information along. So thank you for your feedback so far and looking forward to ongoing discussion.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Matthew and Josh. I just want to point out that these two very capable individuals are our Larimer County's budget department. And I think it's an example of how we try to do things very efficiently. And we are a very lean operation. I know when I looked at the comments, Matthew, that you sent us regarding the input that we received on the Balancing Act interactive tool, I found them to be fairly insightful. And I think one of the big takeaways that I got was that we need to continue to do an even better job of educating folks about the details of some of these services, because there were comments in there that suggested something which wasn't really an accurate representation of what we do at the ranch or that sort of thing. So I think that's an important takeaway for us, and that's something we need to try to do to improve upon. So again, thank you to Josh and Matthew. And I don't know if there are any questions or comments, Commissioner Johnson, if you'd like to add anything, or Linda. Otherwise, we'll turn it back over to Michelle. Well, actually, are there any questions or comments from folks who may not be panelists?
We don't have any. Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner. We don't have any questions at this exact moment. Nothing via Zoom and nothing on YouTube either as well. Thank you for asking.
Great. And Matthew and or Josh, were you going to explain this last slide?
Sure, and thank you for the kind comments about us working efficiently. We like to hear that. So this is just a quick overview of the remaining calendar for the budget process. Tonight, obviously, is the public hearing. On November 4th, there will be a work session on possible budget alternatives that we will examine. And then November 19th, there will be a budget direction retreat where we can discuss the ideas that were brought up anytime, whether it's by members of the public or by staff, or that we discussed on November 4th, where we can get further and perhaps final direction. On December 8th, at Administrative Matters, Tuesday morning, we will review the final budget changes. And then the budget will be adopted on December 18th at 10 a.m. in the Commissioners' hearing room on the first floor at the courthouse offices. And that concludes my presentation.
Yeah, I would like to chime in with my appreciation for Matt and Josh. We only have a $287 million operational budget, and you guys keep track of more than $500 million in money in the total budget, and there's only 2 of you. So I think that's pretty remarkable, and we appreciate your work. Thank you for it.
Thank you, Linda. Steve or Tom, do you folks want to add any closing comments? And then we'll turn it back over to Michelle. And I think we might be towards the end of this hearing.
I just want to thank Michelle for setting this up tonight, and thank you, Commissioner Kafalis, for hosting and emceeing our presentations.
Yeah, and ditto. Well-run meeting. I hope some people get to actually watch this and see what's going on in their county. And thanks everybody for making it a good meeting.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Steve. It's always nice for kind words. Michelle, do you want to inform people how this will be put on YouTube and broadcast and all that kind of stuff for folks? If they get bored on a Friday night, they could watch it.
Of course, I know that's what everybody's going to do this Friday night. Actually, yeah, so we are broadcasting live on YouTube now. As soon as we're done, it will just turn into a typical YouTube video, so folks can go to Larimer County's YouTube channel. Just go to YouTube and put in the search Larimer County and it'll show up. You should be able to find our budget hearing there close to the top since it's our most recent video. And so that's how folks can rewatch tonight's session. Additionally, I know you guys are always open to additional feedback as you move forward. Email for folks to give feedback is BOCC. That's Board of County Commissioners, so BOCC@larimer.org. I think that's all I have for the evening. Commissioner Kafalis, anything else?
Well, just that I have 2 community conversations in November. I think one is, Saturday, November 14th, Fort Collins, LaPorte residents. And I believe the topic, the featured guest will be, it'll be Matthew, right? Is that correct, Matthew? So Matthew will be the featured guest, and he'll give an overview of the budget and also the Balancing Act interactive tool. And then I believe we have another one with the Wellington, Waverly Buckeye folks. Later, actually, that's the first one, November 5th. And then November 14th is Fort Collins. But I think, Matthew, you'll be on the November 5th one, right, Wellington? Yeah, nodding is good. And Josh, you'll be participating in this Saturday, November 14th. So we will have both of these folks presenting for our community conversations. That's all I have. And I think it's time to say good night, and we wish you all well.
Good night.